So sometimes you might find a staff telling you that, yes, there's no conflict in interest. There's only conflict in interest when you're buying a particular thing, but not when you are renting. And that is why I'm putting in these other terminologies. When I looked at the definitions, this particular definition stood out to me because it just tries to capture everything, whether it's a license, tenancy, a franchise. Yes, Zondervan are giving us the franchise, but on what basis can they give us the franchise? And that is what I'm going to take us through, because when we talk about franchising, there is maybe that is the only organization that does this, or it is going to benefit the students when you get these Bibles or the concordance for free. And or when you're the sole distributor in Tanzania, the sole distributor in South Africa of that particular Bible or that concordance or Bible dictionary. So that then gives you that permission, and maybe this is a single sourcing. So we'll be talking about items like that, and I'm preempting even as I talk about the definition, so that when we come to the different types of procurement, you can now start appreciating what should be done at what particular stage or what level. Now, moving on to distinguish between procurement and purchasing, we are saying that purchasing focuses on the cost of the order. How much does it cost? While procurement focuses on value creation and total cost of ownership. So in procurement, we want to say that when I buy it, it is fully mine. Who owns it fully? So if it is a franchise, I am having exclusivity on the franchise. I'm looking into aspects of ownership. And beyond that, I'm looking at value creation. That, as we spoke much earlier in the definition, that we're looking at scarce resources. That the theological college or seminary has only limited resources within which we can do certain things. We discussed that when we were discussing the matter on budgeting, that the resources are limited. That is why you're creating a budget to say who gets what when. So we want to ensure that there is value for money. And this is why you find then when it comes to procurement, we always insist that then you need to have at least 3 quotations. Let us see who quotes well. We will start insisting on technical proposals. Let us see technically, how are you saying you will deliver to us? Let us say if we're procuring an ERP system or any software, are we comparing many softwares vis-a-vis what we are doing and what we really need? So then you're looking at value creation, that we want to buy from somebody who will give us value. But when it comes to purchasing, you're looking at the cost. You go on the shelf and get any software that is cheaper, but you're not necessarily looking at value creation. So sometimes you could buy something expensive, but it will run you for a longer term rather than buying something that is just cheap. So while purchasing aims to minimize the cost of an order, procurement aims at other objectives like risk mitigation, contract compliance, cost savings, ongoing supplier relationships, etc. So that then gives us the difference, that purchasing focuses on minimizing cost. And I have seen, especially in government circles, sometimes you find people say, they say they're doing procurement, but they say they are giving only the lowest bidder. And that to me is more of purchasing, rather than going into aspects of value creation, risk mitigation, contract compliance, and ongoing supplier relationship. Because sometimes you have a long-term relationship with a particular supplier, and what you're interested in is that they can continue servicing whatever machines or whatever aspects of the seminary that you have. I hope that is clear as far as the distinction between the two are concerned. Now, moving on, there are 3 components of procurement. The whole procurement process. I'm still on the procurement process before I go to the stages of procurement. And so these 3 components, I may as well call them the 3 Ps of procurement. You know, it is marketing that normally has 4 Ps of marketing. So the 3 Ps of procurement are people, processes, and paperwork. Procurement has to deal with those 3 Ps: people, process, and paperwork. When we talk about people, what are we saying? that we are interested in with people. Number one, we are saying that people are responsible for initiating or authorizing every step of the procurement process. So people become an important element or component of procurement. Secondly, procurement specialists, whom we'd call a procurement officer, you'd call them the accountant, and accounts payable and business groups that request goods and services. So even the user department, the department that wants to use that particular motor vehicle, that particular computer, these are people again. So there are people involved in the procurement, and there are people involved in using the item that we are procuring. And thirdly, we are saying the number of people involved often depends on the value of the goods and services. Most stakeholders may be involved in specifying and approving the high value purchases. There are some high value commodities. For instance, I have been involved in various organizations when it comes to purchasing or procuring of an ERP system. An ERP system cuts across the whole organization. So you want a representative from the registrar's office, from the accounts office, from the principal's office, from even the users down there that may not be the direct people, from the students community. You want a representative, so that when you touch the system at any touch point, it is affecting all the other people. When we start registering a student, it affects the accounts department. Has this student paid? When you touch that, it affects the registrar department. So you find that the number of people involved will often depend on the value of the goods. Now, we may not involve all those departments when it comes to maybe buying a newspaper, and that is where purchases comes in. So we may not involve all these same people when it comes to buying the food stuff that the students will be eating in the cafeteria. So you find that the number of people will always depend on the value, on the value of the goods or services, how important it is and how it cuts across all the sections of the entity. Now we talk about process. This is an effective procurement process helps in keeping costs down and ensuring timely supplies. So remember the value we talked about, that in procurement, we want to add value. We'll look at costs just like in purchasing, but we're saying, can we ensure timely supplies? Can we ensure that we never run out of what we are looking for? We are using whiteboard markers. Who supplies us with whiteboard markers that are used by our lecturers or our professors in the seminary? Who supplies us with stationery? And we don't want to run out of that stationery. Do they understand us? Can we create a relationship such that they understand how we use these things over time? On process, we're also saying that a well-designed and methodical process promotes accuracy and timeliness. We're also saying that a disorganized process results in inefficiencies and potential costly errors. And this is where then it becomes important to focus on procurement. So overpayments can start happening where you don't know who supplied, when they supplied, and it is not clear, and you are not able to track through documentation. We later on in this training, we'll be talking about documentation, and you'll start seeing the importance of this. So overpayments impact the bottom line, while late payments negatively affect supplier relationships. So the disorganization of the process can now start causing overpayments or even start causing late payments, which then mess your name. As much as you are a Christian entity, out there then you find people saying, do not supply to Wolaita, for example, using Wolaita West from Ethiopia as an example. I'm not saying that you're the ones who do this, but I'm sure and confident you have an organized process. So I'm just saying you'll start seeing people point a finger, and as you go out there to certain suppliers, they start saying Uganda Matters is not a good pair. They will delay with your payment. So some of those things now start putting some of the best suppliers away from your list, and they start shunning away from your organization. So we have talked about the people and the importance of the people, that the people are there in every aspect of procurement. They are the ones who are the users of what we are procuring, and they're the ones in the procuring process in itself, and how many we want to utilize at any one time. We have looked at the processes as well. And now lastly, we want to talk about the paperwork, because procurement is so much about paperwork. I'm reminded of Dr. Lucy telling us in the very first session that we learned here about source documents, and we are defining some of the source documents. A lot of the source documents, ladies and gentlemen, come from procurement. And this is why we are insisting and emphasizing on procurement as a step in itself. When we talked about auditing as well, you had us go back to those source documents, that the source documents will assist you in the ledgers and eventually in the trial balance. And that is what the auditor is also coming to look at as evidence. So coming to the paperwork, we are saying maintain easily accessible records for every stage of the procurement process is critical. So maintaining the paperwork in every stage of the procurement process is very critical. I will be taking us through each process and saying what document is there. Each stage, as I go through each stage, next, I'll be talking about the kind of documents you should be having, so that we don't come out of this training today having talked about source documents, but we have not elaborated to you what are these source documents and what are some of them that you are missing when it comes to procurement. Procurement is heavy on documentation. This is where all the expense aspect happens when we talked about the statement of comprehensive income. So you can be able to compute all your expenses when it comes to this. So this paperwork acts as a store of organizational knowledge about payment terms and supplier performance, even if the procurement staff changes over time. So we are saying today that even if the principal leaves, the accountant leaves, we have a paper trail. We have something that we can actually trace back and say, well, we don't have to call Michael back here because he did a great job. Let's go to the file for 2019. Or not because Michael did a great job alone, but because you as the principal, you as the deputy principal, you as the dean have put in place certain controls that you talked about yesterday, which have led to good paperwork, a paper trail that you can be able to have, whether physical paper or on computer with backup and storage. That is important. So lastly, I'm saying that they help in an audit or a dispute. So we talked about this paperwork, and which we call evidence when it comes to auditing. And that is what auditors only ask for, the same paperwork. Or when there is a dispute, even within the organization, we are saying paperwork becomes very important. So ladies and gentlemen, these are the three key components of procurement: people, process, and paperwork. As we go through the stages, I'll be highlighting the same issues, touching on the same components of the process that are very, very critical, even as we continue. So we have various types of procurement, and I want to go through the 4 types of procurement that we have. And I want to emphasize what is it and give you certain examples, even so that when you walk out of here and you're saying there are 4 types of procurement, it is very clear what they are, and you can be able to highlight examples. The first type of procurement is what we call direct procurement. In direct procurement, we are saying that these are any goods or services required to produce an end product. Goods or services required to produce an end product. This could be raw materials, components, and parts, machinery, items, and those that are purchased for resale. And this could be mostly, the examples I have there mostly are maybe for production company. Let's come to a service industry like yourselves. You are giving service to the students who are coming to the theological college. What do you procure? The most important thing you procure are the lecturers. or the trainers, or the teachers who come to teach the students. And the procurement of this should be highlighted clearly in your HR manual or in your HR policy. But how do we go about the recruitment of lecturers? That is what I would call direct recruitment. That is very critical to what you are doing. I would call the teachers or the lecturers the raw material of what you are doing. And you could add some more and say that is direct procurement. So ladies and gentlemen, why are we even talking about these types of procurement? We are talking about them simply because as we highlight direct procurement, you may want to giving you these types of procurement. And so you list down that this will have to go through direct procurement. It is critical to the element or the process that we are doing as a seminary. And given that it is very critical, then we want to focus on this and say, how will the procurement process go? Remember much earlier when I was touching on people, I was saying many people will be involved when it comes to an issue that is more major. So you want to ensure that the recruitment process of our lecturers, as many people as possible are involved. The finance person would be involved, the principal will be involved, the registrar would be involved, or even the person, the dean who is in charge of that particular unit should be involved. So you find that then even at some point in some organizations, they then break down the recruitment to different levels. So you find that the main person who needs the person in that entity will be involved together with another peer at the same level in another department altogether, just to help to gauge, and then including now the HR person or the person in charge of recruitment. So those three people are involved in the first stage of recruitment. Then you'd find that you'd even go to a second stage of recruitment, which is, I'm calling it recruitment, but remember, this is our core now. I'm speaking, I want to speak to our hearts in terms of what we are doing. So, because getting in the lecturers for us is an element of direct procurement. So you move on to the next level where the principal then is involved, maybe with the dean, to also look into this person. Are they the right person? Do they espouse the values of this institution? So they go to a second level. So maybe the first level we had 10 candidates. The second level, you just pick 3 people whom you want to give to the principal and the dean to look at again. And so a third level can be there, where the principal then sits in with the last 2, or even the last one that has been selected, together with the board chair or the HR committee chair, so that they go through stages like that. So you'll find, when I was talking much earlier about the people as a key component of procurement, I'm bringing in now all sorts of people and at all sorts of levels when it comes to direct procurement, because it is very critical. The same will apply when it is not necessarily now procuring of a HR service like the people. The same should apply now for key components that you're utilizing, like the ERP system. That is a direct procurement, because that is very, very critical. I'll go next to indirect procurement. These are all non-production related goods or services. They are not involved maybe in the direct aspect of what we are doing. Buying of a stapler, ladies and gentlemen, it has nothing to do with the lecturer. The lecturer can miss a stapler, but the classes will go on. And that's what we're talking about. So you can then now decide this office supplies, marketing services, utilities, buying tea bags. I mean, I know tea can be a very sensitive issue, or the coffee that you might be taking can be a sensitive issue for your lecturers. But what they want is the tea to be available. And so that is an indirect procurement. It does not have to go through rigor. It does not have to go through various stages and processes. So that is indirect procurement. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about now goods procurement. You may find goods procurement can fall again under both direct and indirect. But when it comes to procurement, we normally then would still separate it, because for some of you, you want to talk about this as the physical items, typically held as inventory, whether for direct or indirect procurement. And these are raw materials, wholesale items, office supplies. So you can see office supplies are there under indirect and raw materials are there under direct. But these are just tangible goods that we are talking about. How do we want to buy goods? Especially for you who are in service, in the service sector. You're asking yourself, what is the policy that should drive the procurement of goods? Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about services procurement. These are all people-based services procured, whether for direct or indirect procurement purposes. This could be legal services, could be contractors for construction, it could be contingent labor or on-site security services. How do you want to procure the services? Are you saying that the user department must be represented when we're talking about services? That who is the person in charge of security must be in that interview, must be there to select which security firm we are bringing on board. So we've talked about services when we're talking about the lecturers or the teachers that you have in the seminary. How do you want to go about teachers? So what services do you have? You enumerate all the services and then decide how you want to go about procuring those services. Now, procurement process has just three stages, three processes again. In the processes of procurement, we are saying that number one, you plan the procurement management. I want to emphasize the issue here is planning the procurement, sitting down and writing down, just like I've told you. For goods, what do we want to do? For services, what do we want to do? For direct, what do we do? For indirect. So planning pays. It is said that if you spend more time planning, you should spend more time planning than actually the execution. And if you spend more time planning, then the execution becomes much easier. And in the whole process of planning, this is where we are saying we're going to place it within a policy. We have written down all these, it is good. This is how we will purchase. This is how we intend to do it. Then we place it in a policy. And so secondly is conducting the procurement. Now you can see the aspect of conducting is being driven by the planning. That if I have a very good procurement policy, it is not difficult for me to then look into the whole aspect of conducting the procurement. I'll be coming to this in broader terms, even on the next slides. And lastly is a control of procurement. Again, I will not fail to overemphasize again what Dr. Lucy took us through yesterday. Controls, controls, controls. Policies, policies, policies. That policy will help you to control the aspect of procurement. That our policy says, this is how we control the procurement. So it helps you to go back and look into it. It helps the auditor also to come back and say, look, in my management letter, I will say the internal control systems are flawed in these particular aspects, simply because you have the controls in place. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to take you through the stages in the procurement process, because I've gone through the procurement process itself. And let me now go through the stages, the various stages, and even the methods that we have in procurement. The first stage is sourcing. The first stage is sourcing. You want to source those goods. You want to source those services. The second stage is purchasing, the purchasing stage. In the purchasing stage, we are saying, like in the definition I gave you very clearly, purchasing is a component of procurement. So in the purchasing stage, that is the actual acquiring, but we have done our sourcing. I'll go through it step by step and you'll be able to appreciate it because it has 9 stages, but broadly broken down into these 3. The third one is the payment stage. That at the end of the day, the seller must be paid. Remember, I was saying that when we're talking about the paperwork, if the seller is paid late, then that seller may stop supplying to you, and it may start interfering with your processes. So under sourcing, we are saying we have, number one, identifying of the need. When you identify the need, that this department actually has a need. This department has a need to change the computers, for instance. Let us use computer procurement here now as an example and take us through the whole process or all the stages in the process of procurement. So under sourcing, we identify the needs, and then we create the purchase request. Now, the first document that will deal with identifying of the need, we normally have a requisition document that the user department requisitions. They write down, it is written down, and then it is approved. So maybe it is a department that has 10 or 20 people. Within that department, whoever needs that computer or that laptop requisitions it and gives specifications of what they need, and it is approved by their supervisor. So that is a requisition slip. Many times we go out there, even as auditors, and one of the key things we ask for is, give me the requisition slip. Let me see that the user department requested it. Let me the specifications that they gave. And if the specifications they gave will not be met at a later stage of the procurement cycle, we will then be asking, were they then communicated to the user? This matters, members, become very, very serious when you get involved in certain things. I was involved in a particular team of people where the CEO of the institution had been procured for a vehicle, and the vehicle that was procured was secondhand. And normally they procure brand new vehicles. When the vehicle got an accident, was involved in an accident, then we started now having challenges and asking ourselves, who procured this? Who approved a second-hand vehicle? And you find somebody can even go home for that particular item because of the chairman or the principal of the seminary that we are talking about. Yeah, because the chairman's vehicle, the chairman of the board, or something that has been procured for the principal, and you find it breaks down. That means somebody needs to go home because they're not careful about their procurement. So for the accountants that are here on board with us, I'm saying you need to institute, if you don't have it officially, a requisition slip, or just say, can I have an email from your department specifying? Then that email should be then printed out. So then you create the purchase request. Now, in creating that purchase request, we're then saying that these are the specifications, and then we assess various vendors. Maybe as an organization, you already have those vendors that you have already pre-qualified. And those you go among the 10 or so pre-qualified vendors and ask them and look at them who can be able to supply us this HP computer. So those are the three steps that are under the sourcing stage. Moving on to the next, under purchasing stage, we have negotiation of terms. Now we start negotiating terms with maybe the 2 or 3 people that we are looking at. We negotiate and we want a good price. We now bring in the cost element. Then we create the orders. And lastly, receive and inspect goods and services. So we receive those particular goods because they have been purchased. This is the purchasing stage. So the goods come in. Now, when these goods are coming in, let me go back to the negotiation of terms. When we're negotiating the terms are written in a contract, and I'll be coming to the documentations later, and you'll start seeing how all these stages are then connected. They are all intertwined, and you cannot break any. You must follow each step by step. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm saying here is that we have a contract that comes in when we talk about negotiating terms, And even creating the order, when you create the order, there is a document we call a PO, a purchase order. Remember, I said, as I touch on this, I'll be touching on certain documents, so that when I come to the documentation later, it makes more sense to you when, at which stage does this documentation come in. So in negotiation, we have the contract. In creating the orders, we have the PO. We can call it a local purchase order, LPO, or a local service order, LSO. So sometimes you go to some organizations and you hear them say, give me the LSO or give me the LPO. So you need to have those kind of documents if you don't have them, and they need to be serialized so that you can see what is missing in between. The third aspect, when you're receiving and inspecting the goods or services, there is another document there that we call a GRN. It is a goods received note. Do you have a goods received note? Who received the goods? Did they receive them verifying that they are in good order, in good condition, as ordered in the LPO? So that is also very critical. And that is why you find that the GRN now will not only be signed by the stores people who are receiving the goods, but it should also be signed by the user, because the user gave specifications of the item. So if there is any dispute, remember I said much earlier that the paperwork is also kept or maintained in case there's any dispute. If there is any dispute why that computer has malfunctioned too soon, we should not blame the accounts department. We should not blame the procurement department, but also responsibility should be borne by the user who signed off the goods received note confirming that they are in good condition. Also again sign a delivery note which is given by the seller, and we retain that document again. So all these documents continue being piled together so that they can add value. They can add value to what we are talking about. On the last stage, which is the payment stage, we say that we conduct a three-way matching. What is a three-way matching? At the payment stage, now we are with you, accountant, or the person who handles accounts payables. Now we've come back to the accounts department squarely where this lies. And we are saying you must conduct this three-way matching. And the three-way matching is you're matching the invoice to the GRN to the LPO. Those three documents must match. And if you find that there is any anomaly in any, then it has to be explained to you, or failure to which you're holding the payment because the three documents are not matching. So that is what we are calling a three-way matching. And then as the accountant, you also approve the invoice and arrange for the payment according to the terms. To manage cash flows better, sometimes we say for certain things we will pay in 90 days, others in 30 days. So remember, when you negotiated the terms in the purchasing stage, during the time of negotiation, one of the things that was negotiated was the payment terms. So you arrange for that payment on the exact date it should be paid as per the contract. And lastly, you keep the records. You store the records safely so that they can be looked into for accountability purposes by the auditors, both the internal and external auditor. They can be also looked for in case there's a dispute that needs to be resolved. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the three stages. I know last time I was asked to move a bit slower, and I'm trying as much as possible to move slower. So I hope that there is understanding. And according to the prayers we prayed earlier, that the spirit of understanding, the spirit of wisdom, and the spirit of knowledge is with us, even as we receive this knowledge on purchasing and procurement. Amen to that. We look at the procurement methods. And I want to say that there are various methods of procurement. And I want to at least go slower at this so that we can have better understanding. The first one is what I'm calling an open tendering. Open tendering. And in open tendering, what we are looking at here is we are saying that you as an organization will go out there and issue a tender openly. And this allows you as an institution to bid on goods or even open competition, you see. So you send it out, whether in the newspaper, you advertise locally, and you have an unbiased way of procuring so that you invited a number of bidders to just come and bid for that particular service or for the particular goods that you're buying. Remember, again, like I said, competition is what we're trying to get so that we drive value from the whole procurement process. So in the open tendering process or method, we openly ask or advertise so that many people, as many as possible, could come in. So some of the organizations, what they do, they then send out an advertisement. I pulled one in the newspaper the other day, and I had a full-page advert that I was looking at for an organization that is asking for people to bid so that they can shortlist for various services. Who can we select? And then once you are shortlisted as a supplier, they will only come to you when the particular services are required or when they want to bid for particular services, rather than opening it all the time. That all the time I want to buy even staplers, stationery, I'm throwing it in an open tendering system. The second one is a restricted tendering method. And in restricted tendering method, we are saying here that unlike the open tendering, here we are saying that we have certain restrictions within which we lock these tenders. So unlike the open tendering, restricted tendering only limits the number of the requests to tenders that can be sent by a supplier or a service provider. So you limit it to particular selected, it is also referred to as selective bidding. You just select that you want to give it to particular sellers or particular people that you want to buy from. Next, we have what we call a request for proposals. And here you would find that as much as we have shortlisted a number of suppliers for various goods, for certain specific goods, like what I was mentioning earlier, the ERP system that we may want to procure. In procuring an ERP system or a software that runs across the entity, you may want to request for proposals. And in the request for proposals, you may want to split and say, we have a technical proposal, keep it separate from what we would call a finance, your finance proposal. And in the technical proposal, you just want these people to articulate exactly how will they go about supplying that service or supplying that good to your seminary or theological college. And then after looking at that, that is when you might go to the other to the other stages. Now, I have what we are calling a two-stage tendering. So I've already alluded to that when I was talking about the request for proposals, that we would have this running into two stages sometimes, where we look at the technical and then the finance proposal. But in two-stage tendering as well, we can go through a number of tenders and look at the technical proposals of various people. But even before we open the finance proposal, we would then go ahead and shortlist certain suppliers. And these particular suppliers would then go further and ask them to again be more specific on their technical aspects before even we go to the aspect of looking at the finance proposals. We have what we call a request for quotations. And this is sometimes when you already have people that you have already shortlisted as your suppliers. In this method, you just go to them and tell them to quote for the service because you have already shortlisted them as suppliers. You have already gone through the tendering process where they have tendered and you have shortlisted them as suppliers for your entity for the next 3 years. So many organizations, what they do, they open it up for many suppliers as much as possible to come in and bid. And after bidding, they shortlist and they say these 10 suppliers can give us stationery. These 10 suppliers will be supplying us a particular service or goods, will be supplying us internet. So once you have those 10, every year now you ask them for a quotation. So remember the competition that I talked about is upheld in procurement. So now you want them to compete against each other. Then again, after every 3 years, you go back and open. And so you find these suppliers of the service will always want to look out, and they know that you are an impartial person. You actually, as an entity, you have good values, you espouse good values, which show that you're transparent, you're accountable in how you're doing your processes of procurement. There is what we would call single sourcing. And I alluded to this much earlier. And single sourcing, we only go for single sourcing when we want to buy a particular, when the supplier is only one. We are very clear, maybe it's only the government that can supply us this particular commodity. Or we want a particular Bible concordance or dictionary. And that only can come from a particular supplier. And so that has to come out very clear all the way from the specifications, that the lecturers are saying, it is this particular Bible, it is this particular concordance that comes from Zondervan that has what we are looking for in order to teach our students the right theology or the right doctrine. So from that perspective, we are then saying you may go for what we call single sourcing as a method, because nobody else has that particular Bible dictionary. And I know in the market, there are very few dictionaries, because it is a tedious process, a lengthy process for these people to go through developing this. So those are the 6 methods that we have for the procurement: the open tendering, the restricted tendering, the request for proposals, the 2-stage tendering, the request for quotations, and a single sourcing method. Let me take us through the principles of procurement. I know I have alluded to some of these principles even as I was taking us through the other components, and I've already touched on some of these principles. The first principle is value for money, and this came out very clear in our definition. So allow me not to repeat it or to reiterate it. We are looking for value for our money. So the cost element, the purchase element, that is why you saw the purchasing stage is in between, because purchasing talks about cost only. And so in procurement, we're looking at that cost aspect as well for value for money. Fairness. We must be seen to be fair. And this is why we are saying, if you as a seminary has been focusing on only purchases, we want to introduce you to the elements of procurement. We want to say, from the training we talked about yesterday, we talked about controls. We wanted to put in certain controls such that there is fairness in the procurement process. Number 3, we are talking about competition, the element of competition. And you have heard me say that you advertise in open tendering so that the best shall come out of the market and say, we can offer you this. And you are able to select out of the best. But even after you have selected, we are saying you give a request for quotations among the three best. So you are giving a request for proposals so that you can just see who request for quotation, sorry. So that out of the 3, you always ask for a quotation from the 3. So you always have the 3 quotes before you can buy anything. So that is the competition we're talking about. Then after 3 years or so, you again advertise fully so that you can even replace these 3, exchange them, retain maybe 1, but have another 2 coming in, so that there is an element of fairness. This, I have seen it happening, especially when it comes to recruitment of auditors. Some firms normally don't keep or retain 1 auditor. They would say, let's keep an auditor for 3 years or for 5 years. because we also want to hear somebody else what they have to say about our organization. So normally as AFCA, when we come in sometimes to look at your accountability and the accreditation aspect, we also look into this. How long have you had the auditor? What does your finance policy state? Is it silent on the aspect of the auditor? And so for good governance and improvement in your processes, we always would say or recommend, please look into the aspect of changing this aspect of your controls. So competition is healthy and important and encouraged. Efficiency is also another key principle in the procurement process. Transparency is a key principle. And lastly, there we have integrity. Integrity, and lastly, accountability. So it encourages integrity because your paperwork can be looked into. There is nothing to hide. The audit trail is there from beginning to the end. And you say you are an accountable entity. The management is accountable, even to the board, as we spoke much earlier. So you have nothing to hide as far as the procurement process is concerned. So these are the 7 key principles of procurement that we uphold whenever we are talking about procurement, or in the whole process of crafting your procurement policy. We normally would encourage you to uphold that. Allow me to talk about documentation briefly, and then we can then just engage, take some of your comments, some of your questions, and then just take a short health break before we come back again for the last session. I talked about documentation. You can see the pile of documents there on my screen. Documents that are held together, that are for each procurement aspect. And so what are some of these documents that we like to maintain in as far as the procurement process is concerned? The first one is what we call a request for proposal. I called it a method, but also now I'm coming in and saying there is a document that is called or known as a request for proposal. And this document is where you document very clearly that when we want to recruit an auditor, what are we looking for? We're looking for one that is a member of the accounting body. We are looking for one that has a requisite knowledge and experience for auditing a similar firm. We are looking for one that has done this over maybe the last 10 years. So you specify what you'd be looking for in anyone who will be writing a proposal for those particular goods. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you can start seeing that we may not want to do a request for proposal for the goods that we are buying under the indirect type of procurement. But this may be done specifically for those that are direct, where we're buying things that are core to the function of the entity. The second document that we will come up with is what we call a request for quotation. If we were to request for a quotation out of these 3 people that are bidding, what are the specifications we want in their quotation? What are they quoting for? Are they quoting for maintenance, or are they just quoting for supply? So that has to be very clear. And members, I'm saying this comes in also largely in the whole aspect of planning. Remember, I spoke about planning when it comes to procurement, and then the actual aspect of doing of procuring, and then lastly, controls. So this is important in the planning stage, that these documents must be prepared. There is a request for information. At some point, you may find that you have already received certain proposals, and you may need further information from the 3 or 2 that you're going to specify that these are the ones we want to engage further in the 2-way procurement process that I talked to us about. So in that 2-way or 2-stage procurement process, we want to now ask ourselves that if I need additional information, I need more clarity. For instance, I have been involved in purchasing an ERP system, especially a lot of these technical and ICT items. You will find that over and above the request for proposal that you put openly, you may need further information or clarity on certain things so that you can make a decision. So we have then what we call a request for information. Then we have invitation for bid. And this again is another document where then you're inviting. Remember, I said you're inviting now the whole population, all people to bid for particular services. So this is something that a procurement manager or accountant should have. A request for bid is also another document that you need to have, or over and above invitation for bid. And then we have number 6, the seller proposal. Now, the seller proposal, you want to indicate how do you want the proposal to look like, because this then will come from the seller. And then you want to look at that proposal and qualify it that it is having this or it is missing. The contract yourselves. Some of us, we might have what we call an undisclosure agreement. So you want to have your own agreements here. So I'm saying here, ladies and gentlemen, some of this may be as technical as even needing to engage a legal firm so that they can draft for you a contract, a standard contract. And you may just engage them one-off and then they draft this for you, and then you can now be using that going forward and just giving it to them for revision or something like that. So in the contract, we may want to specify also amendments or modifications. What do we do when it comes to amendments and modifications? So you may want to have a separate document which stipulates what you do in regards to amendments or modifications to whatever item that you're having. So having talked about these documents and coupled with the other documents that I talked about when I was going through the stages, now I can assure you that you will never go wrong in your procurement process. And even as you endeavor to discuss and agree, what should we embrace and what should we not embrace? So the documents should be structured in a particular way. And that's, we're talking about number 1, they require potential bidders to submit all particulars for the employer to evaluate the bidder. So in structuring the procurement documents, you need to require that the potential bidders will submit all their particulars to you. Secondly, that all submissions to be set out in a clear and honest manner to ensure that the shortlist criterion is unambiguous. So you have to be very, very clear, even as you're developing your RFPs or RFIs, you need to be very, very clear that all the submissions shall be set out in a very clear and honest manner. Many a times to do this, what they say is that just don't even write the name of your entity on the envelope. Just write technical proposal. Leave it to us, we will open it. Write financial proposal. So have no marking whatsoever on your envelope so that you are favored in any way. Clear definition of the responsibilities, rights, and commitments of both parties in the contract. So when you're designing the contract must be very clear. What are the responsibilities of each party, the buyer and the seller? A clear definition of the nature and quality of the goods or services to be provided. Provisions without any prejudice to the interests of either party. That also must be very clear in the structure of your procurement document. It has to be clear and easy to understand in terms of language. So the language that is used in the documents, in the contracts, in the RFPs must be a very, very clear language that is clearly understood. So try and break it down, tone it down so that it is understood by all. So ladies and gentlemen, I want us to take a health break, but before we go for the health break, we have in summary talked about the process of procurement, the stages involved in procurement, and even the documentation involved in procurement. I would like to invite any question so that we can then just engage on questions or any comment whatsoever so that we can then engage and properly move to the next stage, have our break and move to the next level. Any question? Uganda Matters, I can see you have unmuted.
Sorry,
that,
could you please?
Sorry? Let's have Reverend Charles first from Zimbabwe.
Right, hello.
Yeah, yes.
Actually, I've never thought that human resource can be classified as falling under procurement process. I thought when you talk about procurement, we're talking about goods and services that we pay once and for all.
Mm.
That's a new thing that I've learned. Then my other question goes on a scenario whereby the institution does not have the power to employ or to hire manpower, is done by the responsible authority. In this case, the church head office is responsible with all human resource mobilization for the institution. Where do we fall in, and where can we write the policy?
Thank you for that, Reverend Charles. I think to clarify where the HR falls is strictly because of the scope that we are in. The biggest thing that you get as a seminary or theological college is the lecturers who are coming to give value to the students and how they're disseminating the value. And that is why I said when you're looking at direct procurement, then we would want to actually ask ourselves, what is our direct raw material? And so then I brought in the lecturers from that perspective and how they are hired. Now, you may not be the one hiring, going to your question, your second aspect of the question. You may not be the one hiring, but you can give the specifications to the church and say, look, we are partners in this. We are your baby. We are the seminary, but we are your child under the diocese. And what we are saying is that in the past, we've had lecturers who come in and they do not fulfill what we are looking for. So we would like to give you certain specifications. So I want to call you the user department in this particular stage. As a user of the lecturers or the teachers that are being brought to you, you start now giving a certain threshold. And so you find even if some of them are the pastors within the diocese who are competing to come and teach certain theological aspects, you will find that they will tell themselves, without a degree, I cannot teach at the theological college. You understand? So some of them will say, yes, I have a certificate in theology, but I don't have a degree. Or without a master's, you cannot now teach. I know Dr. Lucy and I have told you in the past that we are engaged also in lecturing. And I do know that when it comes to like the university where I teach on part-time basis, they are very clear that you cannot teach a PhD program if you're not a PhD holder yourself. So you find all those who teach PhD are PhD holders. So it may not be just the qualification, but also, Reverend Charles, there are also competencies, certain competencies. You want to say somebody who has been exposed in which manner. And I think if you sat down and agreed that, you can now then have that as your policy in recruitment. So that then you can also tell the diocese, look, I know you are giving us this person, but they are falling below the threshold of what we had agreed earlier. I hope that helps you.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really helpful.
Welcome. We had a question from Uganda. Uganda Matters.
Yes, thank you. You were a good teacher, but some of us, we are slow learners. I didn't grasp you in the aspect of the principles because the speed was too high.
The speed was high.
Yes.
Okay, let me look at the principles again and see whether I can just take us through that again. Okay, the principles were 7. Allow me to just share again my screen so that then that can help you in that sense. Thank you for your courage on that, Reverend Bosa, because we are here to learn, and it's important that we learn as much as possible. Even if it needs me going back a bit, I need to go back so that we get them. So we have our 7 principles of procurement there. if you're preparing a procurement policy as a control document from what you discussed yesterday, I'm saying that this has to be embodied within your procurement policies. It has to, we have to see the element of value for money. So you ask yourself, as we're procuring, where is value for money here? How do I get value for money? And this is when we talk about the finance proposal. You remember I said sometimes you'd break down the proposals into the technical proposal and the financial proposal. So the financial proposals come in here. But before even you look at those financial proposals, you'll have looked at the technical proposals that these people, there's an element of fairness, competition in how they have brought in their documents, and we have vetted, and that there is a clear committee that actually does the vetting. Then there is an element of efficiency. And so this principle of efficiency must be embodied even when it comes to the aspects of procurement. That are we upholding efficiency? So how to do this? Sometimes you'd actually ask yourself within that technical proposal, you ask yourself, who has this person actually delivered to? Do they have references? For instance, can I talk to their references? Someone can tell you they're providing for you something, for instance, Reverend Bosa, and maybe they're also saying that they have given the same thing to St. John's Theological College in Tanzania. And then you ask, give me a reference. You get to talk to Canon Lucas, who is here with us in Tanzania. You give him a phone call and say, tell me, how is this system working? Is it efficient? So on efficiency, we talk about aspects like when you ask for references, that is where the aspect of efficiency comes in. The aspect of transparency is where the bids are all opened at the same time. Not that the accountant opened one particular bid and is pushing for that particular bid beyond the others. Let us see sealed envelopes being opened officially on the day when we have agreed as a committee, as a tender committee, or as a procurement committee, that these documents will be opened. The aspect of integrity, again, this is where we are saying there is no conflict of interest, that I am not, I'm not the dean of students or the dean in charge of studies, and I'm the one who is only vetting lecturers alone. You see, that aspect of integrity will start missing. So integrity has to be there, where then you subject the user to other people who are going to also score and agree that this is the right thing to do. And lastly, accountability. I know we spent a whole session talking about accountability, but accountability as a principle is very, very important when it comes to procurement. I hope that is clear, Reverend Bosa. Reverend Bosa, that is clear?
Yeah, it is clear.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to leave you behind. I can see Nyasha, you have unmuted. Maybe you want to contribute something, a comment or a question?
Yes, thank you, Say. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
I'm Nyasha from Research Bible College, and thank you very much for this lecture. I've really learned a lot. I have two questions that I want to check with you. Back to Reverend Ziomo, we are from the same institution, Research Bible College, and I've understood the question that he has. And also on that area, there's the part of the first part of recruitment of lecturers. You had talked about the involvement of finance person, registrar, principal, academic dean, and HR. So my question on that is, how can a finance person and registrar be involved in the recruitment of lecturers? That's the first question. Then the second question, I missed the third, on the three-way matching, you said invoice, GRN, and the third thing, I missed that one. So probably on that area to just clarify, how can a finance person be involved in the recruitment of lecturers, or the registrar be involved in the recruitment of lecturers, and probably noting the third thing on the three-way matching. Otherwise, we are more into purchasing and procurement. I've learned and seen that in most of our areas, we are not really like practicing it. We don't really like have it. Our purchasing is just probably once per term or something. So there's no that time of recruiting or choosing or having the suppliers to bid. We have learned a lot. So thank you very much on that. Thank you.
Most welcome, Nyasha. Let me start by the first question that you asked in terms of the finance or the registrar being involved. What I would say very quickly is that I was using that as an example. You can have different ways of doing it. That was just an example to say you could take the finance in or the registrar. However, on the other hand, one would argue that the finance person would just come in because they want value for money in terms of paying. They know the salaries that are paid, and maybe they would come in and ask the question, what are you looking for? Or maybe at some point they would find that you're recruiting maybe lecturers that are very expensive. And why is this the case? And so they want to come in and maybe be involved in the negotiation process in one way or the other. I've had situations where we've had to call in the finance person, and when we are convincing them that the market is high, actually, when it comes to certain goods or certain recruitments of technical people, you find that you need to then convince the finance people. And when they come to the interview, they see the pay slips and they see certain things. They may ask things that you may not ask. The registrar of students as well, at the end of the day, the students are the ones who are consuming what these people are coming to teach. So you may find that. So as Michael, I may justify that in that manner. But what I was giving an example is when you want to break down, you may keep away the finance person. The finance person might also tell you, look, you're bothering me with something that is not of my concern. The salary scales are there, they're given, you stick to the salary scale. So he or she may not be involved fully. Nyasha, thank you for that. Now, on the three-way matching question, the three documents that we look at when we're saying three-way matching is the GRN, because that is the first is the invoice that you are given, the supplier invoice. Because when you gave your LPO, or what I'm calling the PO, you gave the PO, that is the sorry, that's the first document, not the supply invoice. You give the PO, and then the PO is the document I know you are looking for, but I want to go chronologically. So you give a PO, a purchase order, with clear specifications that this is what we want to buy from you. The PO is followed by an invoice from the supplier. So the supplier invoice is the second document. And then the third document is what I'm calling the GRN, the goods received note. This is again an internal document for you. The person delivering will deliver and give you a delivery note. Some of them do not have delivery notes. And because they may not have delivery notes, it is incumbent upon you to also then develop this particular document that I'm calling a GRN, or a goods received note. That were the goods really received. And that is very critical, because sometimes people claim they delivered goods, but we've had cases in Kenya where people deliver air and you cannot see the computers. People say they delivered, you can see all the goods, you'll see the invoice, you'll see, you can see the PO, but were the goods really delivered? There was no GRN. But if there was a GRN, then I will say, fine, a computer was delivered here. Why do I have 5 computers? I should be having 6 computers. Look for who signed for that and let them confirm that they actually received the computer. I hope that is clear. The 3 documents are clear.
Thank you very much. They are clear. Thank you, sir.
Most welcome. I think the reason we're having this engagement session is because sometimes I could move fast on something and it's good to clarify. So thank you for the questions that you have raised and just the engagement. I can see it's now 11:34 and you'll allow me to, or actually it's now 11:35 East African time, and Southern African time could be 10:35. So allow me to just request that we go for our 20-minute break, so that when we come back, we will stop the session at 1 sharp Kenyan or Eastern African time, and Southern African time, 12 sharp, we will stop for a 30-minute break as advised by Lucy. So allow me to take a break, and then Lucy will engage us just briefly for 5 minutes after we come back for the break in terms of the link, and then we finish up the session for today. Thank you. Dr. Lucy, please come on board.
Yes, we are getting almost to the close of this training. And so we are going to have the graduation in the afternoon, like we mentioned earlier. So I wanted to ask, is there any one of us who has not received the graduation link? After registering, the link was to be sent to your email. Did you receive the link? If you received, what should I ask? If you received the link, please put up your hand. If you received the link for graduation, you're not going to sign in using this link, so let me know if you received the other link. Sharon received it, Bethel has received. Anyone else who has received the link? Yeah, for the Utah has received. The rest of us have not received, eh? Okay. Seems like a number of us have not received the link yet.
Yes, not received.
You have not received?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I'm going to make some arrangement. I will be able to talk to you before we dismiss you after this lesson. So let me talk to our communications person so that I would know how we are going to handle that in a short while. Let me do that, please. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Over to you. And okay. Sorry, before I go out, before I go off, I wanted to notify Utah that you're in the graduation, you'll be representing your team. You'll have 2 minutes for that. I think I had mentioned to the others. We have Utah, we have Ziomo, and a few others from the other, colleges. So you'll have 2 minutes to represent your team and tell us what you think about the training during the graduation and about AFCA in general. So those 2 minutes will be there available for you. Okay, Michael, please, you can proceed.
All right. All right. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Sure. I haven't also received the link myself, so I'm saying I haven't received the link.
Thank you, yeah. Reverend Goodwell. Thank you for confirming that. I know, Lucy, you can hear that?
Yes, I am following up. I will be able to give you direction just before we dismiss you after the class.
Wonderful, wonderful. Right. Thank you. Thank you for that, Lucy. So maybe once I'm done with in the next about 30 minutes or so, after we just engage for 10 minutes, then Lucy could come in again just to give us direction on what we will do and how we'll go about our afternoon session. Now, I want to just recap a bit on what we have discussed so far. So I've come back to our learning objectives. And the first learning objective we have there was to discuss the procurement process. And I took us through the process and the three-stage approach also, which are the stages in the procurement process. We defined procurement, then we went through those stages and also looked at the various documentation that are required in procurement. We now want to look at the aspect of sourcing donor funds. And I said this is just a bonus aspect that came up when we were talking about managing donor assets and managing the relationships with existing donors. I know Reverend Bossa asked me if I could touch a bit on how then do we also work with existing donors. Otherwise, if it were not for that slide, I would just be finishing with the fifth element, which is the role of leadership in giving oversight to the finance function. So I want to touch number 4 and number 5 objectives so that we can then close our training on financial management and disclosures. Now, I want to touch on the issue of sourcing donor funds as I spoke much earlier. And when it comes to sourcing of donor funds, I'll touch on 6 aspects here. Number 1, I want to talk about an overall fund seeking strategy. Within AFCA, we normally have what we call a resource mobilization aspect. We have 7 standards, and the last or the 7th standard is resource mobilization. And when we talk about resource mobilization, we normally encourage most of the not-for-profit organizations to have a resource mobilization unit, if not a fully fledged unit, a committee, that various members within the organization will focus on resource mobilization. So when I talk about an overall fund seeking strategy, I'm saying that as an institution, it is important to have a fund seeking strategy. It is important to sit down and ask yourselves, even as we talked about the budgeting process, that we have all these needs. But so far from what we've been able to get, which is the school fees and the existing donors, they can cover only this. So that now you ask yourself, how else can we then get the other money? So that if you have then resolved that the rest of the funds may not be gotten from the diocese, which is the parent organization that owns the theological college, then you can now ask the diocese to allow you to go out, if that is when you're owned by the diocese, to allow you to go out and reach out one-on-one to prospective donors to fund maybe a service that you want to do, or to fund maybe a building project that you want to engage in. Just like we had from the rest of us here, that there are those of us who have buildings or even certain services like discipleship being funded by an external donor. So you'd have even certain projects that your students want to carry out, maybe certain research or certain activities they want to carry out in the community. And those require funding as well. And you may then now need to outline under the overall funding strategy that this is how we will go about raising our strategy. This portion shall come from the parent entity, which is the diocese. This other portion shall come from the students. This other portion from existing donors, and as we manage the existing donor relationships, but yet another portion then needs to come from outside. And so we are saying that this needs to be very, very intentional. And I want to take us through the intentionality that the Resource Mobilization Committee or entity will then be engaging in, even as we talk about being intentional. So we'll start by donor mapping. And what do I mean when I say donor mapping? When I talk about donor mapping, I'm basically saying that it is important to look out and say how many donors exist, what kind of donors exist. So can we map out the donors that exist maybe within your locality? Before we even go into say who is able to finance or to fund something that is Christian based, let us look at all the existing donors. You know, you could talk about people like World Vision, Compassion International. We could look at maybe a directory even of the donors in the US or in the UK, which are these big Christian entities that are there, or even non-Christian entities, but they have funding. The limitation that we have as believers is that sometimes we just limit ourselves to just Christian entities, but we can broaden that scope and allow ourselves to also look at donors that may not be Christian, as long as you do not compromise your values. The important thing is let the values of the entity not be compromised. So if you find that you'll knock a particular door and your values are compromised, then from a donor mapping perspective, you will then now start eliminating. So my question here is to you, have you ever done what I'm now calling donor mapping? One within your own country, those that are represented, all the donors, all the NGOs. Some of these places you could go, like in Kenya, we have what we call the NGO Coordination Board. And we have all the international NGOs registered there, and they have a directory. And one would walk in there and say, look, how can we partner with this one? How can we work with the others? Some you'll be told they're in agriculture, and maybe you want to start off an agricultural aspect within the school. Remember, I have challenged us time and again when we're talking about managing those assets. And I challenged us saying that we need to look at the return on assets. You're sitting on a land property that maybe the diocese donated many years ago. And is it productive? Apart from the classrooms that you have, what is the other land doing? So do you want to put together a proposal for agriculture? Then those agricultural based entities will see the value of partnering with you so that you have a sustainable project that can continuously bring students there who can go out and change or transform the world. So I'm saying, let us not limit ourselves, but let us map all these donors, and at the end of the day, be able to now start eliminating, especially where we feel strongly that we have not, they may not add value. So that donor mapping is an important aspect. Then you go further to what I would call donor research. And I think I've already alluded to that when I'm talking about donor research, about going to the national NGOs coordinating body, or just researching for those particular donors. So you've mapped them, then now you just research, what do they specifically do? They support agriculture, they support what are they supporting, and which ones are the low-hanging fruit, which I would say low-hanging fruit are those that you say you have the same values, they're Christian. They will understand what you're doing much easily and much better. You may not have to design your proposal like what I called the agricultural proposal. You may just need to be very direct with this type of donors. When you are doing this, I want to talk about key considerations and the four, which I'm calling the 4 C's. So the first C is coherence. You must look at aspects of coherence. And this is a key consideration when you're looking for the donor. Remember, when we talked about strategic planning, I may have mentioned a word called strategic fit. And that is what coherence implies, that your values and the other values go hand in hand. So like I said, you may want to start with those that you're finding there is an element of coherence. You may not find coherence in terms of maybe the Christian aspect, but you may find coherence in terms of like in Kenya, we have a foundation known as Safaricom Foundation. This is the mobile telephone company that has a foundation, and they pay for education of students who are moving to higher education, who have finished secondary level education. And so why shouldn't they pay for those? Why shouldn't they sponsor those who are coming to a seminary? Those who feel they have a calling towards coming to a seminary. So you'd approach an entity like that because they're talking education. You're also talking education. It's just that the element of education you're talking about is theology. So look for the element of coherence that you have in terms of the 4 C's. The other aspect is capabilities, capacities, sorry. What capacities do they have? Do they have the capacity to support you? Are they, that's where you ask yourself, are they supporting somebody else? Are they, for instance, if you are in Uganda and you look at Uganda Martyrs Seminary, are they supporting a similar thing in Tanzania? Who is supporting these aspects in Ethiopia, in South Africa? So that means they have the capacity. So you start saying they have the capacity to do what I'm asking them to do. And then the other aspect is a calendar. You ask yourself about the calendar. A lot of them, their calendar year ends at a particular time, and you may want to know when are you approaching them for this funding so that they can place it in their budget. So the timing is of essence here. So I'm saying calendar is very, very critical. And then lastly, I'm talking about check boxes for eligibility. Check boxes for eligibility. You want now to tick and be very clear that I am eligible for funding from these ones. So you want to now knock that door. The scriptures tell us, ask, seek, knock. You want to consistently knock that door because you have checked that box and you're very clear that these people have the coherence, they have the capacity for me, and I'm able to approach them from that perspective. We'll then develop what we are calling a prospect table, because you've checked the boxes and now you are having a prospect. This is now the key entities that we are saying you have put them on a table and you're saying this is the way to go. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we started up there with our overall fund seeking strategy. Were we seeking funding for the agricultural land that we are having? Were we seeking funding for the library? So if it is for the library, any entity that is sponsoring an education something, They can be able, they are eligible, and you can put them on your prospect table, and on your prospect table say education. This is way before we prepare our proposals. And so that is why I always tell people, planning seems to take almost 80% of your time. So I'm saying to us that planning for this funding from donors is a critical element of what we are doing. So the prospect table means that you are zeroing down so that you're not, from what you did in donor mapping and donor research, now having done your eligibility checkboxes, you now are very, very clear. These are the prospects we want to approach for this year. But you did not leave out anybody from the beginning. You said everybody is a potential, but you don't want to waste your energies just going for every NGO or every donor that you hear. So that is something that I would like to just make clear right there. So then you now can start the application process and considerations. And remember, the application process has to also go hand in hand with the calendar, that there is coherence between your calendar and their calendar, that there is synergy, and that when you're asking for the money, you're not told, okay, fine, our year normally begins in April and we had done our budgeting in December. So today is 1st April and you're taking your proposal to that particular entity. You know that you are going to miss it out in terms of timing. So it is important then to look at it differently, that this is an entity that as you're approaching them this April, you're basically having discussions that will last until December this year, so that in January, February, when they're preparing their budget, you have already prepared their mindset to be able to support you. Because a lot of this donor funding is not done impromptu. They all have what they are looking at. And remember, you cannot ignore the documents we talked about much earlier, like the reports. So the reports are very, very critical, that one must prepare their reports, which is financial reports. You now prepare under the application process, what are the benefits that other donors have derived from us? How is your reporting aspect to the donors? That is also very, very critical. So when you get to the application process, remember you're applying to those only that are under your prospect table. So you're very clear that these are the ones that are prospective and we can apply to them. One additional thing that I can say here is a lot of organizations today want entities that have an element of accountability. And so they are going for entities that are accredited by accreditation bodies like AFCA. And in AFCA, we know that, for instance, so many of the NGOs or even the Christian NGOs and Christian organizations that we work with, those that are members of AFCA in the whole of Africa, starting from north to south. These are entities that have enjoyed continuous support from particular donors in the US or in the UK, based on the fact that they have an element of accountability, and that AFCA has assessors that come into your organization annually, look into your books, guide you, prepare a management letter, which is transparent and even can be seen by them. So an AFCA accreditation, I always like to tell entities, is a good accreditation that also just shows that you are accountable and you are ready to be for your books to be looked into. I know my friend Dr. Lucy is the one in charge of member services. So she has more details. If you wanted to become a member of AFCA and be accredited, she has more details on that. But I'm just giving you hints. Those are some of the things that you find now start making you look good and prepare you just for a broader range of donors, because donors have reached a point where they feel funds are not being utilized well, and they want you to open your house for, apart from your external auditor, another entity that is just looking at your processes, just like what AFCA does. Allow me then, members, ladies and gentlemen, to move on to the role of the leadership in giving oversight to finance function. And I know this is of interest to the accountants here, and maybe you may want to do what we normally call in human resource management a 360 degree. You want to hold your boss to account that they should be watching this they should be helping you or supporting you in this manner. And on the other end, I know that even those who are here as the principals and the administrators, you may want to also hold the accountants to account on the matters that we're going to discuss here. So first, we are saying your role as leadership, whether you're the leader in terms of in accounts, you're in top management of your institution, is to ensure that accurate and complete financial records are maintained. We have talked about this starting from when we began this webinar. This is 2 weeks ago. This is the 3rd week. And we are saying that it is your responsibility. It is your role to ensure that those books are accurate. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, we have taken time to take you through so that you can understand these numbers. You can understand the ratios. You can understand the budgeting process. You can understand the controls. And finally, you can say, look, here are the accurate books and you know the right questions to ask. Secondly, is to monitor income and expenditures against projections. And this is from an aspect of the budget. This is what you projected, and this is what you monitor. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that some of our institutions, we only get to look at this maybe half yearly, but I encouraged us that it is important to look at it monthly. You need now to demand from your accountant to compare budget and actuals month on month, not quarterly, not half yearly, but month on month. You need to track that and monitor. That is the responsibility of leadership. It's also the responsibility of leadership to review and recommend financial policies to the board. I know Nyasha asked me that question, and I said it is you then to go to the diocese and recommend the policies for hiring or the policies for getting in the right people. So including ensuring adequate and internal controls and maintaining financial records in accordance with standard accounting practices. I called these standards IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards. So you need to acquaint yourself with this. Maybe one good question to ask as a leader, anytime your accountant comes to you, it is good to ask them next time, what does the standard say about this matter? What does the standard say about expenses? I was sitting on a board recently, and on this board, I was asked a question because there is a property that was donated to this particular entity, and the entity has not taken full possession. They were asked to pay something that's very nominal, but they will pay it over a period of 10 years, but very nominal compared to the land itself that they were procuring. And so sitting there and looking at it, the question there that came was, what do the standards say? Because the accountant had decided not to take that land into their property, plant, and equipment. And so the question was, what do the standards say? And the standards are very clear. You do not have to have the title under your name as long as you have possession. Remember when we talked about leases here before, I said a lease, a 10-year lease or even 20-year lease, as long as that you assume possession of that, it becomes an asset. And so from that perspective, we were able to then convince them why this should be treated the way we were proposing for it to be treated. And so members, what I'm saying here is that it is good for you as the dean, it is good for you as a principal or assistant principal, next time to ask that question again of your colleagues, of your auditors, what do the standards say? So your job is to recommend policies that are in line with the standards that the board may be able to embrace. Policies on depreciation, we've talked about matters depreciation or everything else. Next is to ensure that accurate, timely, and meaningful financial statements are prepared and presented to the board. So you're not only preparing them or ensuring their completeness, like our bullet 1 is saying, but you are also ensuring aspects of accountability. Many times when we come into institutions, we ask, can we see the board minutes? What are we looking for? We want to see that the board actually discussed the accounts. And you'd find at some point the board just discusses the number of students, the enrollment, but nobody's discussing the figures, or nobody's going in depth to discuss the numbers. They're just saying, well, the revenue was this, the expenses were this. But does somebody go in depth to look at the assets and other matters like those? So it is your responsibility to ensure that there's some element of accountability, that somebody is checking on you, the board is there to check on you, and that the board is actually receiving these reports and they're able to help you build a better institution. Next is to present monthly financial statements also to the board, not only the audited accounts, but also the monthly financial statements. Sometimes this may not be to the full board, but this is important to be given to the board finance committee, because the finance committee, if there is a finance committee, they will keep on looking at this and how your expenditures are moving and asking the right questions. So we're talking aspects of accountability. And remember, when we were discussing this on Wednesday, we said accountability begins with you. It begins with me. Remember the fingers that were pointing at this gentleman? He pointed at himself first before the rest pointed at him. So and financial planning. So we have talked about budget preparation here. And in that session, we also discussed the aspect of strategic planning. And in strategic planning, we also touched on the financial planning, that the budget comes at the tail end when you're implementing the strategy. So the responsibility then is there to ensure that that is done. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, the responsibility that we have as leaders is to propose for board approval, a budget that reflects the organization's goals and board policies. So a budget that is in sync with the strategic plan. Remember, we synchronized that even as we were discussing much earlier. So that is a key responsibility. We are also to ensure that the budget accurately reflects the needs, expenses, and revenue of the organization. So you can see there's a lot in terms of responsibility that lies on us as leaders as far as finance is concerned. Matters strategic planning, matters budgeting, matters financial planning, all this is our responsibility. I will not leave this session without again emphasizing something that we have overemphasized here together with Dr. Lucy, that you need to safeguard the organization's assets. Remember, assets are what we own. Liabilities and equity is what we owe. So assets are what we own. How do you safeguard an organization's asset? Maybe I will pause there and ask that as a question to see who can respond to me on that, even as we are coming to a tail end of this. How do you then, as a leader, safeguard the assets? I'm looking at somebody to unmute and give us a response on that, because we talked about that during this webinar. This is a webinar without an exam, so this is the only way we test that we know what we are learning. How do we safeguard the assets of the organization, especially the fixed assets?
I think that on the paramount is the question of setting controls. And I'm thinking one of those ways of setting up those controls where there are clear policies that are set up in connection to each and every operation that is in the organization, including how assets are handled. That's what I'm thinking of.
Thank you for that. The controls and the policies, and I know that was touched on yesterday, but when we talked about assets also, we also talked about that is true, and that is very, very key, that the controls need to be there, because the controls then govern aspects and other tools that we use. But there is a key tool that we said here will be used also for safeguarding the organization's assets. Uganda Matters?
That tool is the asset registry.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Reverend Bosa. That tool is the asset register. So as we have said, if you come out of here and it may take you time to prepare your other controls, but as Father Limbani rightly says, the asset register will be governed by the controls. The asset register and other tools that we have are governed by the controls. But a quick win as you come out of this is to ensure that you have your asset register and it is in compliance with what we have taught you here. That is the beginning of safeguarding your organization's assets, because it is those assets that assure you of continuity tomorrow. Thank you so much, Reverend Bosa, and also Father Limbani from Malawi there. Appreciated your feedback on that. Now, those are what I would say your responsibility as a leader, even as it comes to matters of safeguarding or looking at the aspect of finance. That is what you're required as a leader to do. And basically, one would say you're required to do what Dr. Lucy and I have been talking about from the beginning to the end. So you might forget anything. It is good to have that timetable she gave you. It also outlines that those are your responsibilities. Basically, ask about assets, ask about budget. Are they presented to the board regularly for accountability purposes? Are they presented to the donors as well for accountability purposes, so that they can add value to you and you can actually attract more donor support and move to greater heights? Ladies and gentlemen, we are winners even as we come to the end of this session. And what I want to share with us or leave us with is a scripture from 2 Timothy 2:15. The scripture in 2 Timothy, Timothy is encouraged by the Apostle Paul, and he's told, make every effort to present yourself before God as a proven worker who does not need to be ashamed, teaching the message of truth accurately. I read this scripture and I say, how do I make every effort? And that is the New English translation. I looked at a different translation, ladies and gentlemen, and it says, do your best to please God. That is the NIV translation. And we have been here trying to do our best to please God in the aspect of stewardship, where he has placed us in the different theological colleges or seminaries we are in. I looked at a different one. The New King James Version says, be diligent to present yourself approved of God. So make every effort, do your best, be diligent. But how do I do that? I would ask. How do I be diligent? How can I be doing my best? How can I make every effort? And the answer comes in a different translation. And that is the beauty of having the translations that we have, you as theological colleges and seminaries, what you teach your students every other day. The King James Version says, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. The word of truth, and what the word says is that you are a steward. And as a steward, there are things that are charged over you. And so you have taken time, you have made every effort, you have done your best during these last 9 sessions, the last 3 weeks. You have been diligent in studying to show yourself approved of God. What I can just leave you with is to say, please act on what you have learned. I have a personal cliche, I would say, that I always say. I say, act now. Just 2 words, two words, and they're both 3-letter words. Act now. Just whatever it is, act now. Don't procrastinate. Whatever you have learned today, whatever you learned yesterday, whatever you learned throughout this webinar, I'm asking you and urging you as leaders, be that faithful and good servant and steward. And indeed, may God bless you even as you do that. Our learning outcomes for today, we were able to define procurement and understand the different stages, understand procurement documents, and finally, we can understand our roles as leaders in giving oversight to the finance function. May God bless you, and thank you for listening. Thank you for being very, very active students. It has been an online class, but one would think it's been really engaging in the sense that we have been talking to each other. It's not just been the facilitator talking. And so I really, really want to appreciate you for that, even as we come to the close of the session. Allow me to just take a few questions, maybe regarding the aspect of donor funding and this aspect we've discussed about towards the end. But unless somebody has also a very burning question overall for everything we have been talking about through this webinar. I know Dr. Lucy is here. I am here. My friend and colleague in Africa, Joseph, is here. And we are able to put our minds together. Whatever we have an answer, by the grace of God, we will answer you. Whatever we need to come back later, we will say we can come back later. So
Michael, please, as they do that, please, we are also requesting that you put on your camera. We would want to take a photo. Joseph is here, and I believe it's somewhere. We will take a photo of the class as we continue. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe let's take any questions or comments, and then for 2 minutes, and then I'll allow us to just put on our cameras then. Thank you for that, Dr. Lucy.
Yeah,
From Uganda?
we are sorry, we got a challenge with our network. So we came in when you were almost finishing about journalist sourcing.
Wow. And the way I dedicated a whole session on understanding how to get donor funding, which was one full slide there, I took us through. I think what I'll do, maybe for your sake, the Uganda team, through Lucy, I'll share the slides, and then you can be able to see that. But I don't know whether time allows me to quickly just share that screen. I can do that in 1 minute so that I don't disadvantage you in any way. Allow me to just go back to this portion. So what I was saying, what I was saying is that we were touching on this aspect of sourcing donor funds. Before you came in, we had talked about sourcing donor funds. And number one, we said you must have an overall fund seeking strategy. Establish an overall fund seeking strategy. And to do this, you outline all your requirements, what you require, and then ask yourself what can be funded by the current donors and even the current incomes that you're getting. And what is this that you now need external sourcing for? After that, you do what we say donor mapping. You map out all the donors. And we were saying, do not restrict yourself only to the Christian donors. List all of them when you're doing donor mapping. What donors are present in your country? Which ones are out there, maybe in Canada, in US, in Korea, that may be able to work with you? That is important. Then you research further what these donors exactly do in terms of the donor mapping is listing all of them. And I said you could easily go to an entity within your organization, within your country rather, that may have a list of all the NGOs and those that are able to support what you are doing. So then you research on them and say, this one support agriculture, this one support construction, this one support education. And so if you have done very well in your own seeking strategy, you will know that maybe you need a library, and any donor that is supporting education can support your library. Any donor that is supporting agriculture can support an agricultural activity that will make the seminary sustainable. So that is under donor research. Then we talked about key considerations, which I'm calling the 4 C's. You must consider coherence, that there is what I'm calling a strategic fit between you and the donor, that there is coherence and there is a strategic fit. Then capacities. Does that donor have the capacity? Is it the same donor who is supporting maybe West in Ethiopia? Then you are putting a tick that this donor has capacity. What is their calendar? The 3rd C. In their calendar, what are they? When does their calendar year end? Some of these NGOs, their year ends in March. If the year has ended in March and you're approaching them today, 1st of April, it means they can only now budget for you or consider for you in the next calendar year. And so that is also a critical thing to look out for. And lastly, we are saying checkboxes for eligibility. Now you start checking, based on the number one, the overall fund seeking strategy, you now connect that with the particular donors that you have, and that shall give you what I'm calling a prospect table. The prospect table is a table now of those that I am saying have a strategic fit to any funding requirement that you have, so that you do not now shoot your gun to all over in the air, but you're very, very specific on your target, that this is the donor. I know they're already supporting projects like ours and they're able to support. Now, all this preparation is what I'm saying is 80% of the work. And 20% comes in the application process, which is the last step. It's not, I always urge people, don't be quick to start applying before you do the others. So in the application process, you're looking at now the document that you're going to prepare so that you can be able to support it very, very clearly based on your fund seeking strategy, based on aspects of coherence, based on even the capacities, because you've done your research and you know that this donor is able to do it. So the application process now comes in and you start then engaging, so that you do then, as the word of God tells us, to ask, to seek, to knock. So keep knocking that door until they are able to support you on the project that you are working on as God's steward. So that is what I shared there. Then I came to the role of leadership in giving oversight to the finance faction. And here, Reverend Bosa and the team in Uganda, we were basically saying all the things we've been talking about.
That part we got it well.
We got this.
Hello? Yes.
Thank you for that. So all the things we've talked about are your responsibility, and that's what I was summarizing there for us. So I'll stop sharing there, and thank you so much for that. I hope that is clear, Reverend Bosa. Any other comment or question?
Hello?
Yes. Wilbert, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm just interested. You were saying that when the accountant or whoever might come making a certain proposal or giving a direction towards something, we should ask about the standards. Is there a standard that cut across all the different aspects in the management aspect, or each one has got its own standard? For example, one that governs the what can I say, the assets, the current assets, so to speak, and the one governs the long-term assets.
Thank you for that question. When we talk about international financial reporting standards, they are a set of many, many standards. They have their numbers, but I like what you're saying, Wilbert. I would ask for international financial reporting standards on assets. I can assure you, even if you sent to Mr. Google today and asked him, give me IFRS for assets, IFRS for liabilities, you can be able to know that. And that's why, sorry, I'm encouraging us not just to learn in this session, but to continuously be students of accounting or finance, because that's a key responsibility in the organization as a leader. So what I'm encouraging, Wilbert, is yes, ask them, what do the standards say regarding this? And that's a particular standard on assets, on liabilities, and so on.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, welcome.